The Marlins come back to beat the Phillies. Unfortunately for the Phillies, their bullpen explodes, and the Marlins, well, the offense exploded. We are now halfway through, and we are reflecting on the half thus far and looking ahead to who the key contributors could be for the second half. Tons to get into. This is Locked on Marlins.
You are Locked on Marlins, your daily podcast on the Miami Marlins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings from England and welcome to Locked on Marlins. This is your daily Marlins pod. I'm your host, Peter Pratt. Hit me up, of course, at Miami Marlins _UK. And happy Friday, guys. I'm feeling pumped. It has been a long week, it feels like, but I'm feeling pumped. The Marlins have put a spring in my step with a come-from-behind fat dub against the Phils. The Phils thought they were going to steamroll the Marlins and sweep them. No, wasn't to be. Reminder, guys, this episode firstly, this episode is sponsored by our good friends over at Booking.com. Booking.yeah, the right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Check out Booking.com for your stay today. Reminder as well, there's a YouTube channel. Make sure you hit subscribe over on the YouTube channel for Locked on Marlins. Join me in the comments. In particular, let me know your thoughts. I want to know your specific thoughts on the Marlins and some of the key questions we're going to be asking now, inspired by Eli Sussman and the Fish on First guys. Did you catch yesterday's episode? Yesterday's live stream with the guys on Fish on First? There's a couple of key questions, 5 key topics, I guess, that they've asked themselves and equally asked me in real time. For those that haven't maybe consumed that yet, I thought I'd just summarize my answers, the questions to them on this episode, just in case, you haven't been able to consume it thus far. I also want to talk about the Phillies getting spanked by the Marlins. Of course, Jake Burger came alive. He was one of the guys I spoke about plenty yesterday. And the usual Pete Pratt curse. The reverse curse in this case, I was just saying that Jake Burger has been the one that has disappointed me most in some ways throughout the first half. Just struggled mightily since returning off the IL. But it was Jake Burger and his bomb that kind of propelled the Marlins. Equally, I did want to briefly touch on another thing from yesterday around the Panthers, them being a timely distraction and a real benefit for Peter Bendix and for the Marlins and for Bruce Sherman, the fact that the Marlins have been so bad coming off a playoff appearance. They've been so bad this year. They just, the start just killed the year. 2 weeks into the season, we knew it was cooked. And obviously they make the move to trade Arias, and obviously the injuries have just been insane in terms of the rotation. So I wanted just to briefly touch on that as well, just maybe how fortunate Peter Bendix has been. But let's start with Fish on First. Their key roundtable topics from yesterday that I kind of answered in real time. Eli hadn't prepared me for these questions, so I had to, answer on the hop, which is probably the best way. I feel like that's always the same. Like, just give it your first answer. What comes to mind is usually the best answer. So I believe their article is up today. So all of the staffers for Fish on First. And by the way, I want to call out Fish on First. It is elite. Elite. It is the best place for Marlins coverage, unquestionably. So I always tip my cap to Eli and all of his guys. They are, as a unit, unbelievable in their coverage of the Marlins. And even though the season is cooked, they have continued to deliver content like you wouldn't know it. You would assume that the Marlins are 25 games over 500 at this point because the content has just been consistent and fire. Okay. Let's get into the questions that were asked. The first one was the Marlins 2024 Marlins are even worse than any of us predicted entering opening day. I believe that to be true, apart from maybe Sean Barrett, who the UK GOAT was absolutely down on the Marlins for 2024. Like, there was optimistic, pessimistic, really pessimistic, and then there was like Sean Barrett just down here. Like, Sean, I think could see it coming. I don't know. Anyway, the why. Why are they worse than predicted? Yesterday, my snap reaction was, you just have to point to the injuries specifically. Like, we know the roster had taken a step back backwards in terms of the offense in particular. Like Jorge Soler and his production, for however Bendix and Sherman wanted to paint this picture of, a full year of Berger and Bell, which is fine. But Berger and Bell were already on the roster last year. Like, they were trying to sell the fans that we're not going to do anything because we've got guys that are already on the roster. I mean, when you take a step back and listen to that, like, man, oh man, that's just unacceptable. That's unacceptable. Jorge Soler, huge part of the Marlins offense last year, gone. No qualifying offer, no interest in Jorge Soler from the Marlins. They may have been right, by the way. Soler not lighting it up thus far. Again, that may have been the right decision. But at the time, you lose that production, and the plan is to replace that production with guys that are already on the roster. That doesn't make any sense. You're never going to cover Jorge Soler with Berger and Bell, particularly because Bell's an expiring contract, and we know what generally happens to expiring contracts. So Bell was likely to be gone at some point anyway. Nevertheless, the why. Why have they been worse? I think the projections already baked in no Soler. And so, I was down on them. I think I had them maybe high 60s in terms of wins. Why are they going to be worse than that? Well, fundamentally, the injuries that the Marlins rotation has had to withstand is crazy, to be honest with you. And I think the funny thing is with this series right now against the Phils, you look at the Phils rotation, it's lined up perfectly for the Phils. Wheeler's still there, Nola's still there, Suarez is still there, Christopher Sanchez, he's going, I think, this evening. They've got Spencer Turnbull doing things, they've got other guys, but look at the Phils rotation. The Phils are absolutely flying this year. They've got the same offensive guys predominantly, but the rotation's there. But the rotation is unharmed. Have they got any? Have the Phillies got anyone on the IL? Anyone of note? I mean, JT Realmuto is at this point. And so, that's a bit of a ding for them. But you look at the rotation and it's and then you compare that to the Marlins. Sandy, Yuri, Brax, Eddie Cabrera, Ryan Weathers. Their whole rotation on the IL. That's unsustainable for any organization. Yes, the Marlins offense hasn't been good enough. Absolutely. But that was already baked into the number. Why are they worse? They're worse because the rotation got hurt. And why are they actually worse? They're worse than we expected because they started so poorly. And that's at the root. They started poorly. The reason they started poorly was they had a few injuries late into spring. And all of a sudden, I think panic ensued. I think the bullpen itself was a bit undercooked. It felt like the relievers really struggled to get into the groove early in the year. We've seen as the year's gone on, they found their groove. But the injuries kicked, panic set in. The bullpen wasn't tuned, I wouldn't say, to a point. Nardi was putrid. Scott was struggling. Everyone was struggling. And so, that's when you look at the root of the 24 season, it's because the injuries kicked in late. The rotation, was worse than expected. And everything hung off that. For the Marlins to be successful, like we saw last year, it starts with the rotation. And then it's followed by the pen. And the offense just kind of has to hum along as best it can. That's the recipe. That was the recipe for the 5 seed last year. It would be the recipe for the 5 seed this year. The Marlins have been unlucky with injuries. I don't know how Major League Baseball generally addresses the issue with pitching injuries at this point, because it feels like it's getting out of hand. And in a sport that is it's a marathon. It's a marathon sport, a 162 regular season. That's a lot of regular season games. That's a lot of innings that you need to cover. And what we're seeing is seemingly every other week is another big time name go down on season ending injuries. It's unsustainable. We get to the back end of the year and all of these clubs that make the postseason, they haven't got any arms left. What's happening in the game, and how is the game going to protect the arms? I know the Phillies are on fire now, and they have been. They've been great. But what happens to the Phils if the next thing is Wheeler, Nola, Suarez are all down and hurt and miss the postseason? What are the Philadelphia Phillies then? They'll be tested, and the postseason is a lottery anyway in many ways. Like the best team, the best regular season team absolutely doesn't always win. But, for me, for the Marlins, why are they worse than expected? They just started so slow. And because those injuries kicked in, they had AJ Park as well going in the rotation, an experiment. They went with an experiment, and that failed too. So there's a plethora of reasons, no doubt. But that's my sense, and that was what I shared yesterday, on the live stream. Go and check the article out. Everyone from the Fish on First guys have put their answers in. We're going to hit the first ad. When we come back, the next question up is which Marlins player has been the most pleasant surprise so far this season? Before we do that, it's time to let you know, firstly, about our new friends over at Booking.com. Yes, sir. This episode of Locked on Marlins is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. And with summer travel heating up, especially travel for baseball games, it's time to explore those U.S. cities you always secretly wanted to learn more about. Yes, we're talking about your rivals' cities. And with hotels, bed and breakfasts, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival's city. I absolutely love Booking.com. I used it only a few weeks back for the London series. I was late to the party in terms of booking. I had a specific need in terms of where I wanted to be to make sure I wasn't traveling too much on public transport. I wanted to be in the action. I wanted to be near the ballpark. Booking.com, super easy to use, best prices. That's the thing. You look on Booking.com, you find their prices. It's so easy to scroll through and look geographically. Okay, this is where I want to be. What's around? Okay, great. You think, well, can I save money? Can I find it elsewhere cheaper and whatever it might be? You can't. Booking.com, they're absolutely on it. So, couldn't recommend them enough. They were immense for the London series for me. And I'm sure the same would be true for, listen, if you were wanting to hit it up in Philadelphia this weekend, why not get Booking.com fired up? So from hotels to look over stadiums to family-friendly resorts, Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S. for your summer travel this MLB season. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com on the site or in the Booking.com app. Yes, sir. And this episode is also brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel. Yes, sir. And I love sports. Absolutely. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games. And the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers. Yes, you heard that right. All customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone. Every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to Locked on Marlins with me, Peter Pratt, and happy Friday, guys. It's almost the end of June as well. Where is the summer going already? End of June. We've only got, July and August, and then, that's it. Nevertheless, maybe some people are praying for the end of the year already. I don't know. I'm sure you aren't. If you're listening to Locked on Marlins, I'm convinced that you're still actively following the club right now. Absolutely. So we've already talked about why the Marlins have been worse. For me, those injuries kicked in at the wrong time, panic ensued, bullpen undercooked. They started too slow and they could never get out of that. And that triggered the trade of Luis Arias and effectively the white flag on the campaign. Which Marlins player has been the most pleasant surprise so far this season? Considering the preseason hype that I was delivering directly around this guy and what he then subsequently delivered, you will not be surprised. This guy would be the ace of the staff on at least 50% of Major League Baseball rotations right now. I mean, maybe at the start of the year too, but particularly where these injuries have kicked in. But Ryan Weathers, for me, has been the guy. We were praying. I was hoping. We've seen the model with Jesus Luzardo, a former first-round pick, struggling on the West Coast, acquired in a trade, comes to the Marlins, struggles a bit with the Marlins, ends the season with his best start of his career with the Marlins, goes into the offseason, and then comes back in spring a different guy. We've seen this story before with Jesus Luzardo, and I was just praying that we would get the same outcome. Could the Marlins do it again with Ryan Weathers? And as soon as I saw Ryan Weathers in spring, I knew it. I knew we were onto something. He put the gasolina way up, Ryan Weathers. I didn't think he had that juice in the tank, but boy, oh boy, Ryan Weathers on fire. He has been the biggest surprise. There's a lot of other names that you could throw out there on this one, predominantly because when you're operating like the Marlins and you effectively keep acquiring scrap heap guys, flyer guys, some of them you're going to hit on, some of them you're going to nail, or not nail, sorry. Some of them you're going to hit on, some of them you won't. And so those ones that pop stick in the mind. Ryan Weathers, though, it's a different story. That wasn't a scrap heap guy. That was a trade that they identified some talent, came out doing a thing. And then you start to unlock that talent and see the value in that. It's a different situation with like a Declan Cronin, an Otto Lopez, et cetera, et cetera. Notable names like Otto Lopez to have the same war, I think, at this point. Please fact check me on that if needed. But feels like Otto Lopez and Luis Arias have the same war. Maybe not for the full year, but maybe since Otto Lopez joined the Marlins. I don't know, but I feel like I've seen that somewhere. I mean, man, oh man, that's a huge surprise. You then look at like Declan Cronin, a guy that ascended in that first weekend, where it was like, who the hell's Declan Cronin? And why is he amazing with the ghost runner on? Why? Have we ever seen a guy go 2 innings of 0-run ball in extras? I don't know. But Declan Cronin, he's had the ladies moaning, and we know this. But Ryan Weathers still clears him, in my opinion. So, biggest pleasant surprise anyway, Ryan Weathers. Honorable mention to a few others, to be honest. Let's talk about trade situations here, excluding pending free agents, i.e. Tanner Scott and Josh Bell and Tim Anderson we're going to throw into that mix. Which Marlin do you think is most likely to get dealt between now and the trade deadline? Excellent question. I think they'll listen on everyone, obviously. Will they get calls on everyone? Yes and no. There's value in all of the guys the Marlins have. Each one of these guys could play a role for any organization. You could even look at like a Nick Fortes, for example, who, it's been super underwhelming offensively for some time, a long time, since he pretty much just burst onto the scene originally. But even Nick Fortes, the defensive aspect, the cost elements, like there's value there in Nick Fortes, in my opinion. And so I think they'll get a call on literally every single guy at some sort of way, because the Marlins are one of the only sellers at this point. Like, there's not many clubs that are selling, firstly, and are selling anything of decent value. I think the Marlins do have plenty of guys that can impact any roster, to be honest with you, to certain degrees. So yesterday, where my head goes with this one is, from an offensive standpoint, you'd look at who are the guys that can absolutely contribute. You straight away go to the main contributors, Jazz Chisholm Jr. Will Jazz be moved this deadline? The sense from Craig Mish is that it's unlikely at this point. So I think that's interesting, that maybe the Marlins are looking to hold on to Jazz into the offseason. Get the sense that Jazz's market isn't as hot as maybe I would anticipate. You then look at like a De La Cruz, a Jesus Sanchez, etc. Considering the cost control situation, you maybe find it a little bit unlikely on those. So where my mind went to is, and we spoke about it on the Fish on First stream yesterday, like the pitching market at this point looks decimated, but the Marlins have seen it firsthand. There's so many injuries. It's not just the Marlins that are dealing with it. And so I think the guys that are moved at this deadline are more likely to be pitchers than sticks, to be honest with you. I honestly think from a Marlins perspective that the Jesus Luzardo injury has a huge impact. Jesus Luzardo would have been the primetime arm available at this deadline. And I don't think he's going to be traded now. And I think for the Marlins, they've missed out on a huge opportunity there with Jesus Luzardo. Couldn't be helped. Guys are getting hurt, right? That's kind of why the market is what it is in some ways for a guy like Luzardo, or a healthy one. But you then think, okay, Luzardo's not going to be moved. Well, who could be moved? And I then look at it and think, where have there been discussions before? There's been discussions around Edward Cabrera. We heard his name talked about. It's not been a great year for Eddie Cabrera, but I think teams will continue to dream on Eddie on the upside. And I get the sense that patience has run out with Eddie Cabrera and the Marlins. And so my gut feel for a guy likely to get dealt between now and the deadline that isn't an expiring deal, I think will be a pitcher. And considering who's healthy right now, it's a toss-up between Trevor Rogers and Eddie Cabrera that are like, meaningful chips, right? And I think the Marlins still see Trevor Rogers in a different way to Cabrera. I think maybe they'll get calls on both. I think Trevor was fine yesterday in his start. But I think the answer to this one will be Eddie Cabrera. All right, going to hit the final ad, and then there's 2 final questions here on the Fish on First round table, let's say. So we'll cover those in a second. But before we do that, it's time to let you know about our good friends over at Gametime. Yes, sir. Got the graphics pumped for Gametime. And Gametime, firstly, is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer you get to first pitch. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. No doubt about it. So the main thing to do here, download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Reminder, guys, last-minute tickets, last-minute deals, you can get 60% off. Last-minute sports, concerts, comedy, and theater. They've got all-in pricing, so you know exactly what the cost will be. None of those surprise fees at checkout. I hate them. They are the thing that puts me off more than anything. I think I've got a price locked in. I get to checkout, and there's fees upon fees upon fees, and all of a sudden, I'm left feeling unsatisfied, and I'm thinking I'm gonna look somewhere else. None of that. All in pricing. And the other thing too, you get those panoramic views from your seat in the app before you buy. So you know what the view's going to be like, pretty much. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Reminder, download that app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Welcome back, guys, to Locked On Marlins with me, Peter Pratt, on Friday, the 28th of June. And we are having a Fish on First roundtable with no Fish on First people here and no roundtable. It's just simply me, sat at a rectangular table, coincidentally. Nevertheless, I was on the Fish on First stream last night and we covered this live in person. But I just wanted to bring it to life for the listeners of this show in case you haven't listened to that yet. So let's carry it on. 2 more questions to go. I also wanted to cover the Panthers as well, just briefly. Only 6 National League teams have a winning record. Predict one of the other teams to turn things around. One of the teams to turn things around and make the playoffs. I think when I answered this yesterday, we included basically who's outside of the playoffs right now, who's going to make it, was I think the way we phrased that. I think the question has been slightly refined because I answered it live saying the Mets, but the Mets are currently at 500 right now. But when I looked at this, who do I trust? Who do I think could make a surge? The Mets are surging. I'm stunned, to be honest with you, with the Mets that they've surged because they looked to me to be one that was going to fully tear it down. Like, I thought they were going to be in the hunt with the Marlins for like one of the top picks, but they've gone on a massive run, correlated with their stint in London. The run diff is positive. Pardon me. They're 8-2 in their last 10. I look at the other clubs around. I look at the Pirates, for example, and think, do I trust the Pirates? No, I don't. The Giants, do I trust them? No. The Nationals, no. The Reds, no. The Cubs, I don't trust any of these clubs. They're all kind of chipping away each other in that Central Division. I get it. Someone has to, ascend. But, with the Brewers and the Cardinals, I think, look in pole position. I'm interested. I'm, intrigued. The Diamondbacks, I think, is an interesting one. I think, obviously, like they're in the World Series last year, so you would assume. I think, maybe Gallen's missing at this point as well. When he returns, we'll see. So I think there's talent there, obviously, in the Diamondbacks. You trust either the Mets or the Diamondbacks most. But, all of a sudden, if the Mets are buyers at this deadline, now they're back in the mix. Like, we know with the Mets, they can be super aggressive. And frankly, considering where they were at the start of this year, the Mets should be buying. They have the resources. They have the collateral. They have everything they need, always. They've got the farm system now, too, considering what they did last year where they bought a load of prospects. So the Mets being buyers feels crazy, but that's the situation we're in where, it's hard to trust the Cardinals, to be honest with you. And the Braves continue in free fall. They've lost their last two. Are the Braves, are they exposed here? Are they at risk? That would be absolutely wild. I don't know what's gone on in Atlanta this year, but man, this wild card hunt in the NL is wild, is hugely open. Hugely open. And yeah, for me, the answer to this one, the Mets. I think the Mets have the biggest chance to make it of all those teams that are not currently in a wild card spot. Final question, who will be the MVP of the second half of the Marlins season? It's an interesting question. And the reality is the answer to this will not be, it's hard to make this judgment right now, considering there's a deadline and the deadline and a trade. The trade deadline remains open, or trading remains allowed. I'm not phrasing this very well, but at any moment, any of these guys could be moved. And naturally, it will likely be the most impactful guys that will be moved. So we know that it won't be Tanner Scott. We know it won't be Josh Bell. We know it won't be Tim Anderson. So who is going to be the MVP of the second half? I think the most likely situation is Jazz offensively. I think one of the relievers will emerge that isn't moved. But the question will be is who remains. But yesterday, the snap reaction to this was, I went with Rodri Munoz. A lot of people would be like, Rodri Munoz, are you sure? I'm pretty sure, Eli's face and Danny's face as well. Those guys are a bit like, are you sure on Rodri Munoz? So let me tell you why Rodri Munoz. The stuff plays. The opportunity is going to be there. Rodri will not be traded. I think Rodri Munoz is going to be a firm fixture in this Marlins rotation. The stuff plays, and I think he's going to get better as it goes on. I can see Munoz. There's a path. I can see a situation where he goes on a run of games where it's like 7 or 8 innings, 12 Ks ago, and everyone's like, man, Rodri Munoz. Like, the stuff is so good with him. It's the swing and miss, the strikeout is absolutely there for him. And if he can avoid those walks and the meatballs, and I know they're 2 big ifs, but if he can, I can see him piecing together some absolutely electric starts, Rodri Munoz. So he's going to be my second half MVP. It's a bit of a dark horse. It's a bit of an outsider, but I think the opportunity is there for him. I think the innings could be there for him. The flashes of stuff have absolutely been there. Yes, he's hamstrung by the walks and particularly the home runs. The home runs is unsustainable, but we will see how it goes. One final segment here. I want to talk about the Panthers being a nice distraction. Something I mentioned on the Fish on First stream yesterday as well. So for Peter Bendix and the Marlins ownership group, one eye on the future, one eye on the present. Whatever the eye was on the present, it was a wonky eye because this has been a disgraceful campaign by the wins and losses. We've already talked about it, where it started. It started with those injuries that kicked in. They didn't get into the groove quick. The season was sunk. They've sold their eyes. It is what it is. They've effectively waved the white flag in early May. In normal years, let's say, I mean, that's probably not the best way of describing it, but in other years, the focus, the spotlight would be even more extreme in this market on Peter Bendix and the Marlins. However, luckily for him, the Florida Panthers have bailed out the Marlins ownership group, the Marlins front office, because the Panthers Stanley Cup run has distracted typical Marlins fans and taken them away from following the Marlins as closely. And they've enjoyed a Panthers run, a historical run from the Panthers, obviously. But Peter Bendix has been lucky. That's been lucky for him. Not that people would be calling for Peter Bendix's head at this point, not that he's under threat, etc., but I do think it's done them a huge favor having the Panthers do what they've done. soon enough, we'll be back around to, football will kick off again, et cetera, et cetera. And again, those eyes can just deviate naturally into the Dolphins or, whatever it might be, the Buccaneers or whatever team you follow. And, the Marlins can just continue to kind of tread along and the season will end. So it's helped them, no doubt. Considering, and I spoke about this a few times this week, but considering what could come back in 25 from a rotation perspective, I'm definitely starting to feel a little bit pumped about 25. I know this year's tough, and it is tough. As fans, it's tough when you wave the white flag in early May, which is what the Marlins have done. I think we're excited to see post-deadline some younger guys get some opportunities. And we're going to naturally follow those stories. The other one to watch out for as well is, does Sandy Alcantara make it back and actually pitch this year for the Marlins? To me, it sounds like, he's upping the intensity. I think that was what was described yesterday. So all of a sudden, it feels like Sandy Alcantara could make an appearance for the Marlins on a mound in 2024. Again, it would be a huge boost for the Marlins to have Sandy going into the offseason healthy, knowing he's coming back in spring healthy, ready to go, ready to rock and roll. We'll see what his appetite is. We'll see what his desire is for the Marlins at that point. We'll see what the roster looks like. But if Sandy's back, other guys are back, we'll see what moves they make. But, if the rotation's looking interesting, then the Marlins could be interesting. We've seen it. If they can pitch well, then they can mix it with anyone. We've seen it the past 4 series. Like, they've gone into Philadelphia now. They've won that first game. Let's see what happens the rest of the way. This series is they're tough matchups for the Marlins. But the Marlins are competing right now with 0 rotation. They're winning series against good clubs with 0 rotation. Super encouraging. And again, applaud Skip Schumacher for that. Guys, thanks for making Locked On Marlins your first listen. That's me, Peter Pratt, on Friday with Locked On Marlins. I look forward to seeing you on Monday, if not before. If there's breaking news, there'll be Locked On Marlins. See you then.